My dad was fired without reason, and he had to sign an NDA and couldn't say anything for 2 years, which meant we couldn't say anything for 2 years. It was really difficult at work because I had to change my last name from a name that was well known, well revered, to a name of a guy that retired, as everyone was told. And having to explain that to people that I didn't want knowing my business, but while also not being allowed to say anything, was really hard.
My name is Rachel Durden. My testimony starts a lot like other people's. I grew up in the church. The church I grew up in, my mom was the youth director. She led the youth worship team. So since she was at every service, I was at every service. My brothers were at every service. So naturally, I got plugged in leading the youth choir as well. My brothers did soundboard. My brothers participated in everything. My dad led worship. He was an honorary elder. Long story short, church was everything, and I loved it. I was a pretty good kid for my parents. I started working at a horse farm age 14 because I loved work and I loved horses, so it was the perfect opportunity for me. I got okay grades, nothing special, but nothing to write home about. I bought my very first car at 17 years old for $400. It was a 1996 Cutlass Sierra Oldsmobile, which I like to share about too because it's also part of my testimony. A shorter chapter, but back when I was in 7th grade, I went on a missions trip with my church at the time, and I was running in the rain and I fell, and ultimately I broke my tailbone. And that same summer I grew 8 inches. So unfortunately I went into about a 4 to 5 year period where I could not sit. I couldn't stand normally. I couldn't bend down to pick something off the ground. And it wasn't until years of praying night after night, day after day, that I get this car that had a broken driver's seat. And I drove it around for a week, and my back was healed almost completely. Every now and then I'll feel a little twinge, but the Lord answered my prayer then. I had a plan for my life from very early on. Again, grew up in the church. You see all these great things around you and you want it too. People go away to a Christian college and join the college worship team, and they meet the love of their life at 18, engaged by 21, married by 23. I wanted the same thing. First kid by 24, house by 25, best-selling author by 26, and so on. I wanted that life. Around the age of 17 also, I happened to know my parents were struggling a little bit financially. So I opted out of going to prom, going to senior trip, and ultimately I opted out of going to my dream college that I had gotten accepted into. All of my friends went away for school, except for one. But ultimately that friend really hurt me shortly into my first year of community college, and we weren't able to be friends anymore. So I was very alone. But I was still working at horse farms, and at this point, I was leading my church's youth worship team, helping them out several days a week. So I was busy, and I stayed busy so I wouldn't feel sad. I think because this perfect plan that I had thought of for myself, that I devised, again, the college, getting married young, being successful young, that whole first part of it got derailed when I stayed home, and I got very lonely that when the latter part of all that started to come around, I ignored a lot of red flags that came with it. I met my ex. I must have been maybe 10 years old. Our parents were in a church group together. And so we had gone to a couple events where I'd seen him. I knew of him. He knew of me. I didn't think anything of it at the time. But fast forward to 21, his dad was my dad's boss. And they were at a Christmas party for work at the end of the year. And they're like, oh, our kids should date. So we did. And 9 months later, we were engaged. And looking back on those first 9 months, I was so excited. I was just so excited that, I'm at the right age. This is perfect. Our parents know each other. I started working for the same company that not only our dads worked for, but my ex, both of my brothers, and both of his siblings. I felt like I was a legacy coming right into the company. I was well liked. I was having great things happen in my life, and it just felt good. It felt so good to the fact that whenever things were not great, I just overlooked them because I didn't want to be the one to mess this up. So we were engaged for 9 months. We got married in the beginning of September. And unfortunately, it was right on our honeymoon that things took a rapid decline. He immediately did not pursue me like a husband should, like I had expected a husband should, like he had before we were married. He was jumping between jobs at work, so I was often the breadwinner. He played video games for hours and days. He called out of work to play video games. Yet I couldn't get him to spend 5 minutes with me. But I took my vows very seriously. I said my vows before God. This was what I had waited for. This is what I had wanted. I was not about to go down without swinging. So I really tried. I made his favorite foods. I watched him play video games, even though I had zero interest. I supported him as he looked for work, and I let him know he can do whatever the heck he wants. And if he wants to stay at home and play video games, then I'll support our family. So I was just trying to do what I thought I was supposed to do. And this continued on for a long time. I grew unhappy, of course. There's only so long that I could keep this up, that I could keep giving everything I had to receive nothing in return. And I was not perfect by any means, but I really tried. In the summer of our first year of marriage, something was starting to feel very off to me. Frankly, it felt off the entire time, but it was just nagging in my gut at this point. And so earlier in our dating, he had been watching pornography. I asked him about it. He said he was. I said, can we keep that out of our relationship? He said yes. Into our engagement, when my family and him were out for a family lunch, I borrowed his phone. I opened it up. I saw he had been watching pornography. And so now as things were not feeling right again, I assumed that, he slipped up again, he's struggling with it. Maybe I didn't understand it like I thought I did. I didn't realize how much that kind of stuff affects people at the time. I didn't know. And so late August, he hadn't texted me all day at work. And I knew this was the the peak. I knew something was going to happen today. So I came home, and he was just sitting on our bed waiting for me. And I jumped right to it. I was like, "What's going on? Are you watching pornography again?" And he said yes, but that wasn't the problem. And of course that was the problem to me. But I didn't know the rest of it yet. He revealed he had never stopped watching it, watched it every day, but that was besides the point. The real point of all of this was that he wanted a divorce. That immediately, I immediately went into prayer. Because I was so shocked. I didn't see that coming. I immediately go into prayer, and I tell my ex that I didn't want the same thing. To which he then said that he told me that he never loved me, except maybe as a sister. He married me because I was a trophy. He did not believe in God, and that he was wanting to explore his sexuality. He said it all with a straight face. And my first thought at this is, Lord, hold me back. Hold me back. I just wanted to swing at him. But in that same moment, as I'm praying, I felt so certain that this might be my last opportunity to show my ex the love of Jesus. And so I tried my best. I listened to him as he was saying whatever else he was saying. I nodded, I listened, I tried to understand, and he left the room after a while. I called my parents, because what else do you do, when you're in trouble? You call your mom and your dad. They immediately invited me home, and a little bit later, he came back into the room, and now he was crying. Now he was bawling his eyes out. And I was comforting him. He put his head on my lap and scratching his back like I was the one that had done something wrong. I was comforting him. So I went home for the weekend, and very grateful for my parents' immediate support. I got there late that night, and they had ice cream waiting for me, and I cried with them. And, we didn't really understand the magnitude of everything at that time. See, maybe my ex was, holding things back from me, and we just didn't know it all. Wasn't sure what to do with the things we did now know. So after spending the weekend with my parents, and spending a lot of time in prayer, I made the decision to go back home. As I said, I take my vows very seriously, and I was not about to go down without a fight. So I created a prayer room in our house. I sought out all the verses that tell you how to pray for this kind of stuff. And I wrote it down on 4 pieces of paper, front and back. And I prayed that same prayer every morning, every night. For that month, we started going to couples counseling per my request. And during that same time, we were also going to our own separate therapy. We kept meeting with counselors for a while. I kept dragging him to church. I don't know if I said it before, but in the early stages of our marriage, I had really tried getting him more involved in church. And so that's when I found Kingsway, because it felt more dynamic than what we'd experienced before. And I felt like it was a team that he could relate to. And so I thought maybe if I kept dragging him back, maybe something will click. I don't know how I even managed to drag him here, but I kept doing it. And it was during that same month that I realized his family knew absolutely nothing. What they knew was that I wasn't meeting his needs. That's what he had told them, which hurt because I tried. And obviously I couldn't meet some of these bigger needs that he was suffering with, but for him to tell him that was what was happening, really stung. And so I told them everything. I sat them down, and at the end of sharing what was going on, they told me they loved me, they supported me, but they did not offer the same to their son. I told his little brother. That was hard. So I prayed in every single room of our house, of his parents' house. I prayed that the Lord would turn his heart of stone into a heart of flesh and meet him where he was and raise him up. I prayed fervently, and I really tried to believe that my ex would turn around. But ultimately, the time came. I had to get my wisdom teeth taken out, and I knew he wasn't going to take care of me. So I made the decision to go to my parents' house. And it was during that time I was at my parents' house that I found out he had been getting together with one of his male coworkers. So it was very shortly after that I filed for divorce. A week before Thanksgiving, his dad called my dad into his office, and he fired my dad, which to this day is probably the hardest part of what happened, because his dad was in a position to be able to do that. And I felt like it was my fault. And my dad was fired without reason. And he had to sign an NDA, and couldn't say anything for 2 years, which meant we couldn't say anything for 2 years. It was really difficult at work, because I had to change my last name, from a name that was well known, well revered, to a name of a guy that retired, as everyone was told. And having to explain that to people that I didn't want knowing my business, but while also not being allowed to say anything, was really hard. I was very afraid for my job at the time. I had been doing well for a few years, and I'd moved up in the company, and I'd made a name for myself outside of the last name. But after seeing what happened to my dad, my brothers were still working for the company too, and we were really afraid. It was so easy for someone as important as my dad to just be erased from something that he had such a huge hand in. But it was beautiful to see how the people at work did still rally around me without even knowing what was going on. My manager sat me down. He flat out said, "I don't know what's happening,
but I've got your back. My team members who sat near me at work, protected me, didn't ask questions. And when my ex-father-in-law came to talk to me at work, they didn't let him. And it was really special in a way to have not only my family supporting me in this, but to have people I don't even know very well do the same. I entered into a marriage saying I'd rather die than get divorced. And so for going through a very public divorce, was shameful. And it took a while for me to come to terms with that. It was actually in a therapy session where it finally clicked for me when I was told, the Lord loves me, his child, more than he loved my broken marriage. And that really, it really resonated with me. And, that was a big foundation for moving forward. But having the support of people that, I hardly knew people at Kingsway, and the people that I told showed me love. My grandparents, who are very old school, didn't hesitate to show me love. No one hesitated to love me like Jesus did. It was really cool. Shortly after I filed for divorce, I won my company's most prestigious award, Partner of the Year, where I was one of 30 out of 6,000 employees to have been recognized for my character, for my hard work. So that early the following year, I got to go on a company trip, and I brought my brother's wife, my sister-in-law, with me as my plus one. And it was just another example of people that didn't know me, but their support when I go on this trip without who everyone thought was my husband, saying I had a different last name. And some executives I had met along the way in my career and my relationship really rallied around me too. And they made sure that I was Rachel Durden, and they made sure that my ex-father-in-law didn't come anywhere near me. They accidentally gave my award to somebody else, and I didn't say anything about it, but I stuck out to the president of the company. And the next night, he made a speech, and in it he talked about my humility, my perseverance, and how I was an example to everyone else there. And then I came home. And this trip was in February of 2020. So we all know what happens after that. COVID started. So I came home from the trip shortly after, started working from home. And I worked from home for 2 years. And during those 2 years, I committed myself to Jesus. I was already committed to Jesus, to the Lord, but I took it to the next step. I was struggling. I was sad. I was still in the midst of the act of the divorce, and working from home, I started to go on a 3-mile walk every morning, every lunch break, and every day at the end of work. And during those walks, I just prayed. I just prayed. At the same time that I was going through my divorce, a coworker who I had previously sat next to was actually going through a very similar situation. And so she reached out to me to confide in me. And it became so clear to me as I was supporting her that I was doing okay. And I was doing okay. I was doing well because of how the Lord had supported me in my prayer time, in my seeking him out, while I was still in the midst of
something awful, I wasn't sad. I mean, I was, but it was different than what my coworker was feeling. And so she asked me, why are you okay? Why are you not more sad? And I just told her, it's the Holy Spirit. It is by the Spirit alone that I'm on my feet and I'm okay. So I started to just pour into her as I could, and she started coming to church with me, and she continued to until she ended up moving to Texas sometime during the pandemic. For the 2 years I worked at home, I made it my commitment that I was going to try to shine that same light, that for whatever it is that she saw, to everybody else I encountered. And because I was doing okay, if people asked me why, I was going to tell them. And that grew. It grew into more than just saying I had the Holy Spirit. It grew into, people asking me how my weekend was. I said I served in church. I invited more people to church. I started to be very bold in how I talked, in how I praised the Lord, and it really shifted that dynamic for me. I wasn't afraid because God had done so much for me and answered so many prayers for me during that time that, how could I not share it? So after 2 years from working from home, I got a phone call from the president of the company, and he said that he had a job for me, and this job was going to be back in person. I hadn't really been around people since COVID, and I hadn't been around anyone from work since I went through the divorce. So initially I was very anxious. I was going to be around people that knew me when I was married but didn't know me now, and it took a whole other level of prayer and confidence to be able to step back into these dealerships that I worked in, and be faced with the tough questions and being ready to answer with the same honesty and boldness that I had from the safety of my home. So this particular work program I was invited into involved me rotating between our different dealerships. And I got this role because I stood out to him on the Partner of the Year trip 2 years earlier. In my rotations, I went to several dealerships. One of them was Toyota. And at Toyota, I met Sam. Now, I was really adamant about never dating someone from work again, because it didn't go very well for me. And so we became friends. I was assigned to shadow him at work, so he taught me everything I needed to know in that role. And we started hanging out in groups. And then, about a month into my time there, we hung out one-on-one. And in the boldness I had developed over the years and, knowing what I didn't want, I told him our very first hangout that if he did not believe in the Lord, that this was going to end right here. I asked him on that same hangout if he watched pornography. I asked him about his faith. I asked him about his struggles. I asked him a lot of things that you don't really ask someone before your first date. But in turn, he asked me a lot of the same questions. Maybe he was a little reserved at first, but it became the foundation of our relationship. We talked about Jesus. We talked about our goals and building a foundation on Christ. We got through a lot of the hard conversations that night, and it built that foundation for us and to grow and to become engaged. And we're getting married in May. And when I reflect back on
my 2 years of praying, naturally, I prayed a lot for my future husband. I wasn't so sure he existed anymore, even though that's all I ever wanted. But I prayed that the Lord would give me eyes to see the truth in any man that came my way, that gave me the ability to have the hard conversations. I prayed for a man that pursued the Lord, loved the Lord more than anything, loved me second. And, reflecting back, I didn't do the same things back when I first got married. And just to see the difference, and to see the Lord's love reflected in the love that Sam shows me, and how God not only answered my prayers, but gave me something far more than I thought I could ever have or ever deserve. Just confirms for me that God's plan is better than my plan. I created what I wanted. I made it happen. Even when there were red flags all over the place, I didn't care, because this was my plan. I liked it. And ultimately it imploded, and it caused terrible pain. But when I set my eyes on Jesus, and when I made sure that I approached this differently this next time, God delivered my heart's desires and more. So it just really showed me, God's plan is so much better than my own. And it's helped encourage me to continue putting Jesus in that place where not only do I put him first, but I put him as the foundation. I put him at the center. I talk about him all the time, because any plan outside of that, it's not worth it to me. It's not a good one. God's plan is better.